Hello, my name is Russell Gomersall, and today I would like to talk about BPM meeting AI and why this is a match made in heaven. Now, first of all, as an introduction to business process management, I think one of the key aspects of process documentation or process modeling is that you build up a process repository where you have a clear architecture over various layers, where you go from a more general layer of, in this picture you see the end-to-end domains, and from there you drill down then in different views, here the end-to-end view, into different categories. For example, the order to cash, here you have a clear hierarchy of clusters, and then you come down to the level of end-to-end scenarios, which are described and which each themselves, for example, this, let's say, sales of kits, for example, also has a lot of attributes, but also, in a lot of cases, models. Each model, again, consists of processes which have a certain sequence. So the key aspect of these models is not only that you have a classical hierarchy of one-to-n relationships between objects as you typically have it in frameworks like APQC or a LeanIX model would provide, but specifically also the sequence of activities is something that is very, very specific for processes. Now, this results in a highly integrated set of processes that are then deployed for different business cases or use cases. For example, am I selling it from stock, the current product, or from selling it from or making it just in time, like a make to order? Am I purchasing and then services or products? Am I doing some subcontracting in combination with some manufacturing, where you then combine manufacturing and procurement processes into an even more complex construct? So, in able to then understand your business, here we already have a clear guideline in setting up such a process repository on the granularity of processes, on the hierarchy of processes, but also on the relations, the interactions between processes, which is not just depicted here as a picture, but which is captured as part of the repository. So it's reportable, it's something that you can analyze and evaluate. This then results, say, next to this end-to-end view, for example, you always also have a repository where you will have some, let's say, clear hierarchical sorting of processes down to the level, of course, then of BPMNs, where you have then the activity level. But most important is then you have all the interactions and interfaces on such a level. Now, the point is, when we're talking about these repositories, of course, in the past, there's been a lot of effort being put in by companies to actually build up such a repository. But and most companies have been on this journey for many years in endeavoring in BPM, then these repositories have grown and have become structured and typically are very well maintained. Now, around this framework of processes, there's a lot of other activities. I mean, this is dependent on the use cases. This can be more compliance related, that you have risk controls as artifacts also mapped against these processes. You have organizational elements like business roles and responsibilities and accountable, so RACI matrices of organizational elements and roles mapped against these processes. But it can also be documents in the context of something like compliance certification and whatever process where more unstructured documents, or let's say half-structured documents like SOPs or whatever checklists, are also then mapped against these processes. So around this framework of a clear, structured and hierarchical repository of processes, which is well maintained, you have a lot of knowledge around the company, from policies down to, as I said, SOPs, from test cases to training documents, from organizational elements. Everything is mapped into this model. Now, I think in the past there were two, of course, challenges. One of them was the actual access to the building up this repository was, of course, error prone and needs to be maintained. But moreover, it was actually then all the knowledge that was actually fed into this repository and linked and mapped to it was hard to retrieve. Yeah, so this is something where I think here the tools and the capabilities also of the organization were lacking then tools to actually really get in, dig into actually all the knowledge that was here. Now, if we look at, say, the AI situation that we have now, I think everybody's seeing so many use cases, and what I think is very interesting and very important now is that with the AI, a lot of use cases are mounted around the large language model. And by tapping into so many sources, it is very capable of, based on a rough description of your business process, it can then make recommendations on how to structure it, which activities may be in there, down to the level that they are also ideas of how to optimize your process. But in a specific customer constellation where you have certain very finite rules on your compliance, you really want to avoid any form of hallucination. And why, in comparison to other fields, I think these AI models really struggle is because of the complexity of the taxonomy that is behind it. And just to pull up an example, to just elaborate this before I dig into then the system to then maybe also just test some cases, just to give a bit of a feel on how they struggle is, and I'm not taking our meta model and taxonomy here, but I'm taking some that other people will also know. So this is just looking into the document of SAP around their reference enterprise architecture methodology. And here we see we have like the business architecture, and we have an IT solution architecture, and we see the key, let's say, objects and relations that are mapped out here. Now, if we have then a business capability, process model, data and role model on the business side, and actually adequate elements on the right-hand side. Now, this is just pure definitions, but when we get down to real and we are describing a specific business capability, then we have some words describing it. And for each of these objects, of course, in such a methodology guide, we have then a brief description and some examples of what they mean and actually how they are to be applied or mapped against each other. Yeah. What is the real challenge is that if you look at the terms that are used here, I think for the large language model, it's very, very hard to differentiate between in a description or in the say the text or whatever information it gets to clearly distinguish, am I now talking about a business capability, or am I talking about a business process, or is this actually now let's say the solution side of this? So if you look at the models, BPM model, it's being used for business processes or solution processes. So what are we now looking at actually? Or is it even in some cases that these are modeled as one, where you have the technical elements in one model and you have the business related aspects in one model? And when I'm saying the ability to sell, am I talking about the process, create sales order, or am I talking about the capability to sell order? And where exactly do I differentiate here? So in order to give exact answers of certain artifacts that are related to maybe the solution, IT side, or to the business on the other side, you really have to be very strict in the mapping and very strict in the retrieval of information. Now, this is something that I think is a real challenge, not only in the field of business process management, definitely in other fields as well. But even for this reason of clarification of terms and taxonomy and meta models, this is the reason of existence for process management in many cases. This is why it has been done for so many years. And as I exemplified in the processes and the process architecture of our reference model, this is exactly the result of having clarity by having clear described objects with a distinctive description with clear relationships between various objects, and these have all been mapped out. Just to again show another example here, if we do have then a certain, let's say, scenario, then of course in this process we also have then relationships where we see, okay, what other relationships are there between these scenarios, and where else does this where does this occur? Yeah, so one process can occur in various scenarios, and of course then each of these has its own descriptions. And also, and this is something that we then also show in the in our object relation browser, is when we say, okay, so let's have a look at these relations by looking, drilling into the actual map, and then looking at what other artifacts may be linked here. These could be documents, for example, that we have certain documents, but we can also have on a scenario level, for example, SAP scope items mapped. Yeah, so there are different artifacts that are all linked and interrelated that we can then dig into. Yeah. And these complex maps are something that you also want to bring into relation. Now, if I look at this scope item from an SAP perspective, a solution process that best practice that can be used to implement a certain business process, we here then have a description. And if you compare the description and the details here of all the, let's say, technical functionality that you have here, there is a lot of similarity, of course, to the description of the actual business process, where the SAP solution process can be used to implement this business process. So when then going into interaction with the AI, this is something where it easily, if you're just using a large language model, can start hallucinating. So what we've just to just play around with this and just to demonstrate this, we have, of course, got then certain assistants that we've built up based on ChatGPT in this example, which we can then fine-tune to show the differences and the level, and also to validate how much detailed information can you provide directly from the large language model, which certain information do you want to retrieve from like embedded information, and which information do you directly want to get via an augmented generation by directly accessing this this repository and submitting structured queries to pre-filter the data that you then want to feed into the large language model. And this is something that we've built up here. And in this example that we've built up, we have a generic chat GTP assistant that will then, without any embedding or functions, then directly just see what answers it generates based on the large language model. Then we have also some where we directly feed it with the information from the end-to-end scenarios that we have, and in this case also the mapping to SAP scope items, just to exemplify how this then works. So if I just jump into this, then I say, okay, so I want to, let's say I just take something, I want to optimize my financial planning. Which scenario do you suggest I deploy? Yeah, so here it's always good to test as well, say the way it can actually go around with the, let's say, fuzzy input, and even the interpretation of what is a scenario is something that without actually feeding in information on the actual taxonomy, it can get lost. Now here we get a good answer, and we see here that it directly comes up with a link to the to a dedicated scenario. And for this scenario, it also then offers directly SAP scope items that are linked. And yeah, and I was just a bit astonished why it produced such a specific result. But the reason is that I have actually now queried this against the scenario and scope item assistant. So here I do have actually fed in the information of a reference process model, yeah, where I can actually also find this. And I have also then directly checked out the dedicated scope items that are provided by SAP to map them against then these scenarios. So here I have a very, so let's take this, say this way around. I've submitted quite a generic question, but I've got a very specific answer, where maybe even I'll just check this, please provide the URL to the scenario. Okay, just to maybe see if I also get then directly the link to the model. And just to also show that this is then something that I can directly look at with its processes, but also its relation then to certain to certain other process groups and the likes. Okay, so if I look at this then here, I also see this some scope items, and it also actually has 4 scope items linked to it. And here, this is the interesting part. It's provided 3 in this retrieval. So it has the 2FM, 1HB, and 5PU. And if we look in the object browser, we have the 1HB, 5PU, the 4RC, and the 2FM. And I think one of them it missed out. Yep. So one of them, it missed one of them out. So what you see here is we've embedded the information of this scenario. We get a very specific answer. I'm going to jump to the generic ChatGPT just to see what the answers that it provides there. But here, by embedding then the information, it does give an exact answer. However, in following up with the mapped scope items, it's generally looked into these scope items, into the description, so they were embedded, but it didn't do an RAG function call to actually say what is actually what we have mapped against it. So these 4, this would be the exact result. Yeah, it's not a bad result, but it hasn't done the explicit full result too. So if you want to have a validated full response, this is when we would actually do then the function call, where based on the scenario, it would then directly call a query to actually retrieve all the mapped SAP scope items that we have actually mapped against this. In this case, it's done a generic search. Not bad results, but not explicitly exact results. Now, let's just jump back then, which I wanted to start with. I want to the generic thing. So I want to optimize my financial planning. Which scenario do you suggest? And of course here, I'm interested to see what happens. Actually, I haven't really checked which model we have behind it, but it'll be interesting to see, based on the, let's say, large language model, what the actual result will be. Yeah. So now we have here some very interesting input. Yeah. So there are 4 different scenarios to consider. So the interpretation of scenario, is it really a scenario? Is it a process? That's something to debate on, where I think that, of course, without having an explicit taxonomy and meta model to describe, is this now a process or is this a scenario? Or is this even a capability? You see that the principal topics for discussion are highly relevant. Are they complete? I doubt it. And there is a bit of a hallucination here. So for financial if I come in and say financial planning, I want to optimize this, then how does education planning come into place here? Yeah, if you so principally here, it's not in a business context at all anymore. It's in a private environment, so it's completely lost itself. I haven't been specific saying I am a big large company, so I'd have to say sorry, sorry, I am a large global enterprise. Can you rephrase? Can you please provide information on business end-to-end scenarios in the context of financial planning? Yeah, and only then actually it gets a context. Yeah, because now actually the way I've phrased it, it wasn't very specific. It actually took to a personal level and came up with something how I can do my personal. I can optimize my personal situation, and now we're getting down to something that looks much more like it. Again, still we come down to the case that here we say end-to-end scenarios. It's rephrased this so that it says it does understand that more. And I think here definitely we are much closer to the truth that we were looking for. So the input is definitely valuable. However, again, in the strict taxonomy that we have within our process management environment, our repository, there is maybe room to debate. Is this now really an end-to-end scenario? Where would it begin? Where would it end? And I think we can even go further and say what actually would be the details underneath it. So if I were to take this in the context of how we typically go about this topic, I would say for the end-to-end scenario, please provide the processes and also suggest SAP scope items which will help automate this scenario. Scenario. Yeah, let's give it a try. Yeah. So here, as I mentioned before, we had a direct hit on a dedicated scenario. We had a dedicated process flow with all the descriptions. We had a dedicated mapping of scope items, which I could actually look up and really were deployable scope items within the SAP field. And here we have then a mix of investment analysis and decision-making, capital budgeting, portfolio management, resource allocation. So here we have 4 processes on the topic of investment and capital allocation scenario. And in the interpretation of the SAP scope items, it doesn't really go into dedicated scope items. It is actually just talking more about the modules. Yeah, so analytics, cloud, and finance, they're more the SAP module side. This is more technology, and this is then also, I think, a capability. So not completely irrelevant, but from the actual drilling it down according to your methodology to say, I really need a dedicated defined scenario with specific processes which I can automate with best practices from SAP. Here, the generic results are not super helpful because they don't really pinpoint on what I need to actually document and specify and put in scope for my project. Yeah, so it's helpful to read up. But then here you do notice a certain level of hallucination. So, and I'm not going to dig deeper into that on the generic side, but I will go back to again, this level, and maybe we just take it the other way around. And say, okay, now let's really look around something like this. And let's go back now to where we say, I have a dedicated defined scope of processes and scenarios, which end-to-end scenario best suits the requirements for investment capital allocation. So here it's only got a very brief prompt, investment capital allocation, and it is then trying to find from the description and the information. It actually finds then not the A to R scenario, but it finds the capital investment projects. So here there is one scenario in our repository that is dedicated to investment projects. And we can actually have a look at this scenario as it's in our repository. And here it's more around how to organize CapEx projects, also from a, say, SAP PS perspective, with or without material and service procurements, and how to actually manage these projects. Yeah? So based on the brief prompt, we did find a specific scenario, and maybe just to follow up on this one, says, do you have specific SAP scope items which support this scenario? And then we'll check out the results. And here it has found some project control around capital projects. So based on the fact that the scenario itself in its description is focused on the project management here, it has found various scope items that do also relate to somehow the project control. On the other hand, I'm sure if we look here and we go to the object itself and check out its relations, we only have two dedicated scope items. One of them is the resource management for projects and collaborative project management. And here we do exactly know, which I can just double check for you, is that there is really, I may have to log in. Yeah, of course I have to log in. Taking some time. Oh, did it find itself? Oh, don't know, it's not hanging a bit, but we at least have these two scope items mapped. And if we check out the ones that it provided here, we still do not know if that isn't really a scope item that it finds. Yes. So here, these are, and this is something where definitely the embedding of the scope items has provided beyond our dedicated mapping of scope items. It identifies some further related then to the whole topic of let's say, for example, here the project controlling. So here we have a complete listing around this. So I think this is also interesting to say, how far does a dedicated mapping and a function call offer a better result? Maybe, or if you want to say be more fuzzy and open to actually then have like a general search over the terms that are somehow included in this scenario, to have a more wider view on, yes, maybe these scope items I would also want to implement in order to, let's say, enhance my capabilities around project management in the organization. And on top, of course, then do CapEx projects, and here bring in maybe some dedicated functionality. Okay, so maybe as a conclusion here as well, the standard ChatGPT will hallucinate, and you do need a dedicated semantic layer. You need a dedicated taxonomy maintained with the content of your company. And that is exactly where BPM, from its basics, from its key philosophy, has always been a fundament. It has a fine architecture, it has clear objects and relations, and it has a nice and a well-balanced granularity of objects that can be directly embedded and included in your Gen AI application. For, let's say, large documents, you always have to go the step that you have to first, extract data. You have to, because you can't typically process the whole document, and you still have to put this document into the context of your business or your business case. So to say, you have to build up your knowledge graph. With BPM, this knowledge graph, this semantic layer, is exactly the let's say the purpose of your BPM process repository. So here you have a real accelerator if you've maintained this well in the past, and it is the baseline for mapping other artifacts against it. That's why I think it really is a match made in heaven, because on the other hand, then all these knowledge bases that have been up over the time can now also be used. Yeah, so the access to the information that in a lot of the times have been built up, companies have invested in, but not really been utilized. Here, there are a lot of use cases where we can dig into. And the other conclusion, which I think I wanted to demonstrate in these examples, is that you have to validate your models. So there are different techniques coming from the generic over the embedding of the function calls, there are similarity searches and on the vector databases, the augmented generation based on dedicated function calls and queries that you can put against the knowledge graph. They have to be fine-tuned. So a lot of out-of-box solutions in a very specific case will work, but you always have to adapt them to your specific repository and your specific use case. Yeah, and this is something where definitely the tool providers offer a lot of tools. They and you can take SharePoint, you can do this document intelligence, say slice and dicing of documents to extract artifacts. You have the possibility of in ChatGPT to fine-tune your assistants, which we've done here, and validate them before you deploy them and use for analysis. So there's a lot out there, but I would always say there's a lot of tools out there. Some of them work out of the box in specific use cases, but it's very important to understand your taxonomy, understand your mapping, and also understand the limitations of these models where you need to validate and where you can, let's say, let them loose into your public, to your internal customers or whatever, without getting too much pushback because the results aren't as you expect.